Gregory.
Thank you very much.
Now, you've made a lot of documentaries at this point. But you make a lot of great documentaries. At what point did you decide this was going to be a topic you wanted to tackle? Was it something you were already always interested in, or was it just, as you've been doing a lot of like Euro horror stuff, was it something that kept popping up? You're like, maybe there's something there.
Well, I've been interested in the concept of Guigno since I was very young, when I got the book, A Pictorial History of Horror Movies by Dennis Gifford. And the first chapter is How Grand Was My Guigno? And it was a very strange collection of words that I didn't understand at all. And I'm not sure I did from reading what he wrote about it in the book, but it was something that stuck with me. And then as I got more books and became older and more obsessed with horror, I heard about this place, heard more about it. And then when we were doing Theatre Bizarre, we were doing the extras for Theatre Bizarre, which was an anthology movie we made, which was inspired by the Grand Guignol. I interviewed Mel Gordon, who was kind of one of the main interviewees here. And that was actually 10 years ago in September that I started this. And so when I interviewed him and learned more about it, learned things like that it wasn't supernatural, you know, that it was based on naturalism, then I became even more fascinated with it and decided it wasn't just going to be an extra on Theatre Bizarre, it was something I needed to dig a lot deeper into.
So when you do decide on documentary subjects, like a lot of these have taken many years, and some of them you're doing concurrently. Like, is there, how do you plan it out? Is it that you do the research and the interviews at the same time, or is it like a little bit of, you know, going back and forth, and like the more you discover things, more like, okay, I need to go find this piece and then that piece? Is it kind of just a journey of discovery as you're going along the way?
Yes, it is. And this one, I'd say Enter Clones of Bruce and Susanna were the ones where I discovered the most as I was making them, because I knew less about the subjects when I started. But this one, well, yeah, they do take a long time, and the good thing about documentaries is unlike a dramatic film, you don't have to drop everything, make it, and be done with it, because it'll become too expensive to make it over a large amount of time. But with interviews, you can get them, put them on the shelf, wait another year until another one shows up and somebody else comes along. This one took this long though because of the lack of footage that there was inside the theatre, and also the fact that half the interviews are in French. I speak more French than I speak Cantonese, so it was easier than Enter the Clones of Bruce in that respect. But I did have to get a French editor to do the assembly, and then I took it over from there. And then the challenge was illustrating it. So Madeleine Le Despencer who is based in England, she was the principal researcher, and she had a collection of her own, but she also was very resourceful in finding images beyond what was in the books that were out there. And then, with the help of Kyle Broom, who is here tonight, he did all the VFX, so he was able to bring a lot of the stills to life. He was able to do that title sequence in the dressing room, and do a lot of things that really kind of, usually I'm relying on clips from movies, and I do a lot in here. Another good thing about doing this was I was able to discover a lot of formative horror films, because horror wasn't a genre when in the early days of the Grand Guignol. It wasn't known as horror, I should say. And so finding things that were like the kind of formative aspects of the horror genre that we now know was very exciting. So finding all these films that hadn't really been in the books or anything like that. And you see that they're more kind of macabre tales, like Alfred Hitchcock Presents or something like that, where they have a twist in the tale and they're very grim, and but they don't have monsters in them. So finding all that helped with illustrating a lot of the stuff as well. But then there were specific plays that I wanted to illustrate. So I asked my friend Mike Etol, who's a very outsider artist. He kind of lives in a haunted house, basically. He has all the creatures and skeletons and masks all over his house, and he'd done that, the Simple Dwarf doll advert and the Anthropophagus doll advert with stop motion animation. So I said, you know, there are 3 specific plays that I need you to illustrate. So he did those, the stop motion stuff. But with the Maxa section, I wanted that to be different. I wanted that to really kind of stand out as like a short within the feature. And for that, I used Leslie Sutnet, who Kayla Janice had used for her Loregenza documentary that she did for the Black Emmanuel collection. And it was just like this very beautiful, what seems like simple animation, but it was very effective. So I gave her the script and had a temp reading. It wasn't even Barbara reading it at the time. She timed it to that, and then I added the music and effects and that sort of thing.
And only because you just mentioned her, like bringing Barbara Steele in to be the narrator, like was that the voice you always heard, or like obviously, you know, her, you know, tied to like Black Sunday and things like that, a lot of the Euro horror stuff that harkens back to Grandiole. Was it an obvious choice, or was it, you know?
Well, yeah, she was the only person I asked. I'd worked with Barbara a few times on restorations we'd done of her films, and we'd always got along. So, and she's also obsessed with European culture. That was really why she was in Europe. It was not because she had an affinity for Gothic horror movies at all, but she liked being in Europe. She loved France, and so when I told her a bit about the Grand Guignol, she was in right away, and this was a few years ago. And but I also it had to be somebody, because Grand Guignol is, as I say, that kind of formative step before horror became horror. I wanted somebody who also kind of connected classic horror and now. And Barbara Steele is really the only person alive who fits that bill. And she has a great voice, and you know, and I was very happy to get her, because to me she's a proper horror star who I've admired since I was tiny.
And I think it's perfect, because again, just cross-generational of like from horror, before there was horror to when there was horror to where it is now. We were talking a little bit at the back, and like I guess not real, you know, being familiar with, you know, Moulin Rouge, right? You know, I didn't realize they were so close to each other. So that area of like France was just basically 42nd Street before there was 42nd Street.
Yeah, it's the red light district. Yeah, but it was also a place of culture as well. I mean, Montmartre is right there as well, and Sacré-Cœur. So there's lots of tourists go there as well. So it's has a real kind of you know, it gets very sleazy after dark, but you know, it's a very popular tourist area during the day. And now it's been kind of Liz and I always stay in that area when we go to Paris, because it's that beautiful melding of, now it's been quite gentrified, but it still has all the sleaze of, you know, the cliche, boulevard cliche and all that.
Now, as you're working on these things, do you find other, you know, this is very formative, like when you're thinking of like separate films and curation, and like obviously a lot of like there's Grandiole, like silent films, some of which have showed up in here. Is it something that interests you as like running a boutique label and like trying to put out films that haven't, like obviously there's a lot of Euro horror that's out there, and I know you're going to continue to do that, but like finding things that have been underseen and all that, was that kind of like part of the mission that tied in with theater of horrors?
Yeah, and that was when I really realized that I had something that I had to finish. You know, gets to a certain point in post-production where I'm like, okay, I see the finish line now. I've really got to devote my time and attention to actually getting this done. And it's with the help of people like Kyle and the animators, and Andrew Furtado, who's the post-production supervisor at Severin, and Mark Raskin, my longtime friend and musician who scored it. You know, that's when they come in and really kind of help me make it an actual film. But yeah, as far as the actual movies are concerned, because our documentaries are, their success or their financial viability is based around us having something to sell with the documentaries, i.e. a box set. When I started to find, for example, the British Grand Guignol films, which I'd never even heard of until 3 or 4 years ago, there's 10 of them have survived from a series of 28 that were made. And as far as I'm aware, they've not mentioned in any of the horror books because they don't have monsters. They're grim tales basically. But I think they're fantastic. And so when we found out that the BFI had them, I said, can I scan them? And they said, well, yeah, but you need to get permission of the rights holder. And the filmmaker was a guy called Fred Paul, which is not an easy person to track down ancestry, Fred Paul. And I said, this company went out of business in 1921. I don't think anyone's going to be knocking on your door for giving us access. And if they do, I'll indemnify you and I'll take the heat. But they were having none of it. So I ended up hiring, actually with the help of my sister. She does a lot of historical stuff in Brixton, where she lives in London, and she put me in touch with a company that does one of those things where you look up your ancestors, right? But I had to get them to do it the other way. I had to start with Fred Paul and find out if there was anyone still alive who was related to him, and he did. He found his brother's great-grandson, and this guy had no idea that his family was involved in early movies in England, but he was intrigued, and I did a deal with him for these movies, and that was good enough for the BFI, so we were able to do that. The other was the other really amazing one was the Paula Maxa film Les Chères Images, because before that, till quite late in post-production, we didn't have any moving footage of Maxa. Like, there is nothing. There was just stills of Maxa. And then she was in one episode of Les Vampires, the series, but she plays a maid, so she's got like a frilly hat on and doesn't really have a close-up or anything like that. So when we found Les Chères Images, that it existed, it's not on IMDb under Paula Maxa. And I looked up Les Chères Images because we found it from a newspaper cutting that Maddie found. And there is a second Paula Maxa on IMDb, just as Maxa. And we'd never looked her up before, and she was in 3 movies, and that was the only one that survived. So that was how we were able to get footage of her actually moving. Like, they made a movie called The Most Assassinated Woman in the World, which is on Netflix, about Maxa, and the actress is in this, and the director, and they'd never seen her move when they made that movie, so they had to kind of make it up. But now you can see her move.
I do think, like, especially in this case, where there's like the materials, like, it's the theater existed when film was being created, so it's not like it was being documented simultaneously outside some stills. When you're working on documentaries and like just finding materials and all that, and you kind of hinted at like, trying to find rights holders and unearthing, like, is how much of it is it you just being a detective and like trying to solve mysteries, some of which are hard to solve?
Yeah, this is the first time that I've had to actually find movies this old. I think there was a 20s Islander Dr. Moreau that I found when we were doing Lost Soul, which had also never been documented in any of the horror books. But this is where we were trying to find a lot of silent movies. And I knew, a huge amount of silent movies are lost, but my God, when you find out, oh my God, there's this one made of this Andre Delord, Edgar Allan Poe, this film's gonna be amazing, lost, and that happened a lot when I found out certain movies exist. I speak to first archives in France, because that's usually where they were produced, and more often than not, the films were lost. But with Todd Winicki, who works at Severin, he is quite the detective, and he knows archives all over the world, and he is the one who found the lost Andy Milligan films in Belgium and Amsterdam. And it's like, who knew that those movies ever left, America? But they did. They were shipped by distributors for a Belgian distributor to consider for distribution. So there was one print that ended up in an archive in Belgium, and he found it. So he was very good, and he doesn't get fazed by a film being lost. He's like, challenge accepted, and well that makes him want to find it all the more.
Now, next year, Severin's turning 20 years old.
That's right.
And as the world's changing, physical media, and you continue as a filmmaker, like, what do you see as the future for not only Severn boutique labels, but like, you know, subjects that do documentaries on? Like, what still excites you that you're out there to discover?
Well, I mean, I continue to be excited by doing extras in general for everything we release, like getting people on record who were there or historians to talk about the film. So we always do that on every release we have. But for something that I'm making into an actual feature, it has to be a bit more than that. It has to be something which can stand on its own. And finding those subjects is a little harder. But I don't know. I don't know. Like Susanna, for example, I didn't know Susanna existed until, you know, a few months before I decided to do that documentary. The fact that there was this huge horror star in Southeast Asia who barely traveled outside, her movies had barely traveled outside of Southeast Asia. And then when I started asking local people in Indonesia about her, old and young were like, oh, Susanna, oh, terrifying. I'm like, so she was a household name in Indonesia. So it was like, that's fascinating to me, I need to know more. So that was, you know, so things cross our paths when we're doing the detective work and the work at Severn, that something will pop up and I'll say I want to do that.
Excellent. David, I know you're jet lagged because you flew in from to Turkey last night or this morning.
I was doing an In the Land of Franco with Stephen Throw.
So I'm gonna wrap up here, but thank you so much. This is a wonderful documentary. When is this getting released, or you can't announce it?
It'll be on digital platforms early next year, I think, but then the big Grand Guigno, and it is going to be a big Grand Guigno box set, will be next summer.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.